Thank you all for joining us at the Creative Vitality Summit. This is our first panel kicking us off, Creative Economy, Policymaking in States and Regions. We really appreciate your participation, both those who have joined us in person and those who are joining us online. My name is David Holland. I'm the Deputy Director of WestStaff. I use he, him pronouns. As a visual description, I'm a brown-skinned man, African-American. I have short cropped hair. I'm wearing a brown shirt and a gray vest with some brown piping. So that's me. And I am co-moderating this panel with John Taylor at the Boulder Chamber, who will introduce himself in just a few minutes. So I'm gonna kick us off. We're really excited about this panel. Creative economy policymaking is something that some people may be perplexed about. That actually happens. Who does that? And we have a stage full of people who do creative economy policymaking in real life every day in multiple states in the WestStaff region. And so we're really excited to have a conversation about the type of work they do, the type of impact they're able to achieve, and why that kind of work is important for local and state governments to be involved in. And so we're gonna kick off with some introductions to give people an opportunity to frame who they are and their work and their perspectives before getting into a conversation with one another. And so I'm gonna ask each of you to introduce yourselves, and when doing so, please respond to the prompt, why is the creative economy important to your state and region? Essentially, why are you doing the type of work that you're doing? And I will start with Josh.
Well, thank you, David, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here and being a part of the panel. I'm excited to be here with such esteemed folks working in this space. My name is Josh Blanchard, he, him preferred. I serve as the director of the Colorado Creative Industries, which is the state's arts agency here in the great state of Colorado. Absolutely, some woos out there. For a visual, I'm a light-skinned man. I'm wearing a gray suit today with a blue shirt. Here in Colorado, the Office of Economic Development is where the arts agency lives. And so I know we'll of course be discussing this today, but we look at the role the arts play through an economic development lens in terms of the creative economy throughout the state at a macro level, but also within individual communities. Like all states, Colorado has such a diverse economic landscape, from urban and metro areas to truly rural parts of the state, our mountain resort communities, which play a critical role in the state's tourism goals and economy. And the arts are critical in all of that. And then we also believe that Colorado should be a place for everyone to thrive and to live, and the arts are in the fabric of that. So those are the reasons why I get to do the work that I do here in Colorado.
Thank you. My name is David Yoshitomi. I'm the Arts and Culture Manager for the County of Ventura, and I am wearing a gray suit with blue shirt today, and I am a mixed race, Caucasian and Japanese male with short brown hair and light skin. So I'm very excited to be here today, and of course with these esteemed panelists, as Josh mentioned, to talk about the creative economy, and specifically to Ventura County. A couple of years ago, there was a creative economy report released by our Economic Development Collaborative, and what they found was that the creative economy rivaled that of agriculture. It's about a $3.2 billion industry in our county, and agriculture is one of the vital economic sectors of our county, and it piqued our elected officials, their interest to find out that the creative industries were rivaling that of agriculture. So they created my position, which is the Arts and Culture Manager within the county. We're under economic vitality as well in the county executive office, and we're looking at through an economic vitality lens on how we can support the creative economy as a whole. And I think one of the things that's also really important about the creative economy that sets it apart is that if you look at arts, music, fashion, design, architecture, those are all elements that help create shared cultural touch points for us. They also create shared cultural experience. They help us understand one another. And because of that, there's not only the economic impact that it has, but there's also the social impact of the arts, culture, and the creative economy. So I think we want to look at that as much as possible. possible to determine why creative opportunity, creative forms of creative expression are important for everybody. So.
Great. Aloha, everyone. You can say it back. It's okay.
Aloha.
Aloha. Very good. Aloha. I'm Georgia Skinner. I am a Caucasian woman, or in Hawaii we call us haole. But I have a Hawaiian heart. I've been there 40 years. I'm actually on the 44th year of my 3-week vacation in Hawaii. I head up I am Caucasian. I'm wearing blue because I want to remind us that the ocean connects us. It doesn't separate us. And I think that's very important. So that's describing me, she, her. And what I love so much about being invited to this amazing event is my work at the Creative Industries Division of the Department of Business Economic Development also has lots of these touch points. And one of the things that we started back in the 2012 was really looking at empowering our sectors that are creative entrepreneurs in addition to being a primary destination for film production. And our creative economy is quite vibrant. We have over 54,000 people in the creative economy in the state of Hawaii. That's all islands inclusive, and that's a study that's done on for-profit and nonprofit sectors. We are really proud to say that we're a $4.1 billion industry, and as you probably know, music is our most important export and the culture of the islands. So my job couldn't be better. I think everything I learned in my life from my parents, from art school and dance and music, brought me to this place, and I'm honored to represent the state of Hawaii and looking forward to the dialogue today.
Hi, good morning. My name is Shannon Roach Halberstadt. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white female with long auburn hair wearing a white collared lace shirt and dramatic gold glasses. I am very happy to be here today. My role is as the Creative Economy Sector Lead in Washington State. It's a statewide position, really looking at the way that the creative economy shows up differently in different places around our state and how we can support it and grow it through policies and programs and partnerships. So the really cool thing about this is that my position is brand new. I've been on the job for almost 2 years, and the state of Washington has established the creative economy as one of the key sectors in Washington state, alongside other sectors that you would think of as in Washington state, such as aerospace or agriculture or maritime. And so it's wonderful to get that recognition that the creative economy not only has cultural value around our state, but it also has economic value. And there are ways that we can support and grow the economic value of that in different locations around our state, and support artists, support creative entrepreneurs, support creative businesses, and help people to have thriving careers where they live, wherever that is in the state. So it's an incredible experience to be here with all these smart people and learn about what they're doing so that we can build this practice together.
Wonderful, Shan. So I'm John Tare, and I will call myself somewhat the oddball in that I am completely focused on our economy in our community as the Boulder Chamber President and CEO. And I have no artistic ability, and I would say that my judgment in art is questionable. But I understand the importance of the arts to our community. So just a little bit background on me. I use he, him pronouns. If I was to describe myself, very attractive. But also, I would say, just to be clear, I'm wearing a pink shirt. I'm probably the only person wearing a tie in the room. And I have roughly curly, strawberry blonde-ish, leaning gray hair. So I was invited just to, if I can, if you don't mind, just to kick us off here, a brief land acknowledgement, Native American culture and recognizing the history of this community important to Boulder. And so just if you give me a brief moment just to open with that. So real quickly, but thoughtfully. The city of Boulder and those visitors with us today acknowledge the city is on the ancestral homeland and unceded territory of indigenous peoples who have traversed and lived in and stewarded lands in Boulder Valley since time immemorial. We honor and respect the people of these nations and their ancestors. We also recognize that indigenous knowledge, oral histories, and language handed down through generations has shaped profound cultural and spiritual connections with Boulder area lands and ecosystems, connections that are sustained and celebrated to this day. We must not only acknowledge our past, but work to build a more just future. We are committing to taking actions beyond these words. We pledge to use this land acknowledgement to help inspire education and reflection and initiate meaningful action to help support Indigenous nations, communities, and organizations. So maybe in that spirit, and just thinking about the arts and how it infuses our community, both culturally but also in an economic way. I'll just wear the hat of the chamber in speaking about why the arts are so important to our community and why I feel like it's an important voice on this panel. And it's two reasons. One, first of all, when you think about the foundation of an economy like Boulder, that has its roots in mining, but ultimately in a university, research university that founded and has grown here. It's the innovation and creativity that comes out of the university that is the foundation of the economic strength of our community, the entrepreneurship, the innovative business activities. And we know that there's a direct correlation between the arts and the creativity in that community as it interfaces with the business community that inspires new innovative businesses that grow and develop in our community. But second, thinking about just pure economic vitality terms, $115 million of economic impact from the arts is no laughing matter, or is no laughing matter? is nothing to ignore. It is a significant element of our economy. We need to nurture it and need to grow it for all of just the basic business vitality purposes. Last thing I'm going to say is the arts are deeply embedded in our economic activity at the Boulder Chamber. The longest serving member of the Boulder Chamber team, except myself, is Deborah Malden, who is our arts liaison and advisor. She's been there almost as long as I have, and it just speaks to the relationship and recognition that we have for the importance of the arts to our economy. Oh, so thank you, Dave. We're co-facilitating, and I almost dropped my job. So the next question for the panel is, what initiative in arts and culture are you most proud of? And what constituency is that initiative serving? And I would ask just how then does that relate to a thriving economy? Jan, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. So, like I mentioned, my position and also the concept of the creative economy is pretty brand new in Washington State. And so for the last year and a half, we have been working with a group of 34 folks from around the state creating a creative economy strategic plan. It was actually led by West staff in cooperation with this 34-person work group and with advice of over 400 people from around the state to create the strategies and the tactics that are going to move our state forward. So it was a heavy lift. We looked at the definition of the creative economy in Washington State, how it shows up as far as numbers, did some economic data and looked at where the economy shows up and how, but then also traveled all around the state and met with people in person to have conversations about what it feels like there, what is the culture there, and how can we be most present to reflect those cultures in the different regions of our state. Because creativity shows up very differently in Wenatchee than it does in Vancouver, Washington. And so from there, from all of this information that came together, we created strategies and tactics to really increase equity in the creative economy, to increase livability for creative businesses and creative individuals, to look at pipeline development and create more transparency about how people enter creative careers and then thrive in creative careers, and then also business technical assistance and business development to help creative businesses really thrive. And so within that, there's tons of tactics and partners that can help make these things come to life. We've already set to work. We released the strategic plan in January of this year, and we've already set to work to make all of these partnerships thrive, and we can talk about that a little bit later, but that's what I'm most proud of right now.
And I know that that's foundational work for your efforts in Seattle, relatively new program, but I know that one of your partners in moving forward on that was one of the folks who has great experience in developing that kind of a program, and it's Georgia. So maybe you can speak about your work in Hawaii.
Sure. Yeah, it's, I would say this division was born in 2003. I came on board in 2007. And it was a landmark move because at that time there was a big emphasis on technology and STEM. And, we come from a place of a deeply embedded indigenous culture. So to ignore that, we have a great state arts agency, our State Foundation on Culture and the Arts. There was a way that I think the leadership in both the governor's office and the legislature felt that this was an important move. So being able to actually map out the metrics to start with was really critical. And we turned to our Research and Economic Analysis Division. And the work that they did foundationally, we also looked elsewhere on the East Coast with the 13 states as a model. And from that mapping, then started to really look at what are the attributes of Hawaii's creative community and cultural community that make us so different than every place else. And we play to those strengths. So I think one of the most important things that we've done as a state is recognize that one size does not fit all, that there is a high level of respect, I think, for the creative economy work that we're doing. And one of the programs that I'm most proud of is Creative Lab Hawaii, which is an accelerator that developed pathways and partnerships with Writers Guild of America, Producers Guild of America, the Game Developers Association, and working with those entities to bring together artists that were at a certain level. It wasn't an entry-level program, but at a certain level, and how they need to build their skills in not only their art, but also in business. So that is the crux of why I think that program started in 2012. We've had a great run with it. We're now diversifying a little bit and focusing on more indigenous storytelling. And I think those things are helpful to any community that has an indigenous population. The other thing that I think is critical and how we have evolved to this place is looking at the three foundational elements that you need: workforce development or talent and skills development, infrastructure and facilities, and then access to capital. So the proudest moment, actually 2 years ago, was taking the rents from our studios and putting it into the Hawaii Film and Creative Industries Fund. It's to develop creative IP for global export, and we have 1.1 million in there now. And I just couldn't be happier. We're going to issue our request for proposals coming up in the next quarter. So that is coupled with everything else. That's why I look so tired. No. Seriously, it's not the altitude, it's just tiredness. But one other thing, if I could briefly mention, because we have a lot of people in the community here that may be artists or also representing artists, that art and commerce are not necessarily bad things together. And there has been a move, and I think we talked about this in our early prelim conversation, that there's a need for us to embrace technology, art together, the movement of indigenous storytelling, and how that really helps shape a place and a sense of place. So, yes, I'll be quiet now.
I loved, we're going to want you to speak up, but I will say I really appreciate the emphasis on the cultural elements of your community and infusing that into the work of the strategic planning and support. So David, want to speak from the California perspective?
Yes, so in Ventura County, it's a really exciting time. First, with the creation of the arts and cultural initiatives at the county level was the first really big, exciting, important step here. And then with that, dovetailing, the Board of Supervisors approved about $1 million to be distributed to the arts community through the county's first ever arts and culture grant program. And that went to both nonprofit arts and culture organizations as well as independent artists. So it represents the largest infusion or distribution of grant funding in our county in our history. So it's going to make a significant impact there. But one of the key focuses of my work in the county executive office is to lead the arts and culture creative economy strategic planning process. So we're a couple steps behind Washington and Hawaii there, but we're really excited to get this going. And of course, we're going to be looking at what the county can do from a policy standpoint in terms of supporting the creative economy, supporting cultural enterprise, and we'll be looking at zoning, housing, grant funding, all of those kind of best practices. But also what we're going to do in terms of understanding the culture of our county quite a bit more is we're going to include a robust asset mapping exercise that will include not only our known cultural assets, our performing arts centers, our key industries, our key businesses, and theaters, venues, museums, but also we're going to have a robust crowdsource option where residents of Ventura County can nominate or basically put on a map their cultural assets that are important to them. So we want to understand not only how people are engaging with the arts and culture in the traditional manner, but how other communities may be doing so in ways that we may not show up on a traditional scan. So perhaps there's a open mic poetry night that's happening at a local coffee shop by a community college that we don't know about. Maybe there's ballet folklorico dance classes happening in the park. These are all occurrences that are happening and are cultural assets in our county that are not registering on our traditional kind of approach to looking at things. So once we have an understanding of that asset map, we hope to first understand how residents are participating in arts and culture, what arts and culture means to them specifically, and then how we can find and fill any gaps in case there's any areas where there's a lack of arts and cultural experiences for everybody. And then additionally to that, we're also, as a county agency, we are the county has worked in a variety of different fields, including justice, human services, healthcare, behavioral health, public works. So what we want to do is look at opportunities where we can infuse arts and culture into those things that the county's already doing. So perhaps there's an arts program that we can use for justice-involved youth. Perhaps we're looking at potentially doing a mural program in our drainage channel systems to help deter vandalism, but also create a workforce development program to get public art training and experience for folks. And then, of course, the benefits of mental health and arts and mental health and behavioral health and overall health care go without saying. So we want to identify all of those different aspects and really come up with a holistic plan that is focused on, of course, the economic policies that we can support to help support the creative economy, but also the social side of things to fully understand what arts and culture means in Ventura County.
I love it. I mean, it's the notion of, first of all, consistency in funding, strategic planning, also the concept of sneaking art into almost everyday life. We know it is around us at all times, but consciously making that decision, really interesting. Josh, from the state of Colorado.
Absolutely. So many similar things in Colorado than what Shannon, Georgia, and David have all shared. The Office of Creative Industries actually came about from during the pandemic. We were Colorado Council on the Arts, and we transitioned into the Office of Economic Development just about 12 years ago. And so there was really a refocus on the way in which the arts are a part of the creative sector. The creative sector represents $16.9 billion of the state's GDP, that's 3.9%, and over 102,000 jobs in the state. So again, right at that 3.9%, that's more than agriculture and forestry as a sector in the state. And so that, when you ask the question, who does it impact? Maybe a more poignant question is, who doesn't it impact? Because it really does impact so many folks throughout the state. Survey after survey tells us that here in Colorado, the majority of Coloradans participate in the arts, either as a participant, a patron of the arts, or as a creative maker involved in making of the art. Over half of Coloradans do that. And so we know that there's a marketplace and that we're in service to the entire state of Colorado. Being in the governor's office, we also have the lens of the governor's priorities and the governor's office priorities. So over the last few years, that's really been bolstering our rural economies throughout the state, looking at the needs of communities and livability and workforce. So of course that translates to childcare, transportation, access to housing as well. And so two of the programs that I'm really excited about over the last few years have really focused on that intersection of how the arts can serve multiple lenses. One of those programs is Colorado's creative districts. We have 30 state certified creative districts throughout the state, which allows the state program to work with communities, work with municipalities in rural areas, in metro areas, to leverage local funds and resources to bolster those creative economies, really from the grassroots level. Every one of our creative districts or arts districts looks different. They look unique. They have different funding mechanisms. They have different public-private partnerships. But at the end of the day, they represent their community's identity, their values, and their key priorities. And that's been a really great tool and engine of those creative economy workforces statewide. The second program I'll mention has been our community revitalization program. That was a grant program that was funded through two different tranches of legislative funding in 2021 and 2022, and then followed up with some ARPA funding. And what that was $98 million in public investment that went back into 59 capital projects throughout the state. Just in the last few years, most of those projects have come online. Those buildings have been put into service. Some are still under construction, and there's a couple that we're waiting for the groundbreaking. So it's exciting to see how these projects have rolled out. But it represents 2,345 construction jobs, and then 266 creative industry jobs. And so again, when we look at that investment, this is who it impacts. And we know that these spaces, we don't build buildings to sit empty, we build buildings for things to take place and for community to come together and for art and creative activities to take place. And so we know that those impacts are gonna be long-standing and will serve as critical institutions statewide.
I'm proud of Colorado with that kind of activity. And also just recognize that we have a governor that is very supportive of the arts. So that's also probably facilitates some of the great work you get to do, Josh.
It is, absolutely. And that gives the opportunity for us to really lean into, again, what some of those priorities are, what the governor's priorities are. And we've had a very supportive legislature the last few years. If we look at the national landscape, Colorado is currently ranks 46th in terms of public art funding. That includes our federal match from the NEA in the country per capita, per person. That's 35 cents per citizen. But what we do with that through 17 programs, through CCI and a mighty but small team of 6, we leverage those community dollars. We work with legislators, we work with individual communities, cities, municipalities, nonprofit institutions, individual artists, and we're able to leverage that support from the governor's office even further.
That's great. David.
One of the things that I think, is innovative about the Community Revitalization Grant Program is that it has also provided housing units, which I know is a concern for most people in this room and most communities in our region and indeed across the country. And so the fact that housing units have come out of that program is another highlight of what you all have been able to achieve that I think is brilliant.
Yeah, that's one of the great needs across the country. We know that, and inflation has impacted all sectors. The arts are not resistant to that. We know that housing is critical for the creative sector, and so definitely recognize my predecessor, Margaret Hunt, for bringing the idea of Space to Create, which has been 6 unique products. And this is another example of partnering with foundations. The Betcher Foundation here in Colorado has had a strong interest in bolstering economic vitality in our rural communities, partnering with other foundations, being able to provide that seed money for those housing projects that are affordable housing workspaces. It got kicked off in Trinidad, and there's also a great project in Ridgeway. There's other projects that are underway, and then that community revitalization piece has come in as well. So the result of that is 748 units of housing in the creative sector across the state.
That's a great model. I mean, it's in art space. We know about art space. It's a very great model for this kind of thing. And of course, housing is a huge priority for Hawaii, particularly Maui, and our people that have been affected by the wildfires. But this is something that I think is really critical for everybody to think about, that marriage of housing and working space and gallery space and creative space in any community. It's really important.
David, did you want to mention any initiatives, or do you want me to just take it away? Yeah, so why don't I just offer a couple from our perspective with humility. And actually, I'm going to mention three because housing is so important. And it's interesting, we all come from attractive communities with vibrant, I'd say, culturally rich communities. They attract a great deal of folks who just want to live in those communities. They tend to attract businesses which want to be around the creative economy. So that leads to then one of the greatest dilemmas, as Richard Florida would call it, the new urban crisis, and that is the cost of housing has become astronomical and a real barrier to ultimately continued thriving of those communities. And so I'm sure so many of your other communities, as Georgia mentioned, are facing that kind of a housing crunch. We as the Boulder Chamber are a lead advocate in our community for infill redevelopment that is of a nature that would allow for a wider diversity of our workforce, including arts and including arts spaces where you would allow for folks to live, work in a gallery space. So that's a huge priority for us, and we've had some great success, so I will speak to that as one of our successes. Just backing up, though, I would just note that Boulder is so rich in artists. We are one of the highest concentrations across the country, as Deborah reminds me daily. And it's that notion that we have this amazing artistic community that I think sometimes becomes a barrier to support of the arts. And I have become attuned to recently that we don't do enough to invest in our arts community. We had then some advocacy in collaboration between the arts community, the business community, and I would say a broader community of cultural community appreciators who came together to support advocacy for the arts in to our city council. That led to some initial funding, but clearly not relative to our other surrounding communities comparable. And so just this last year, we came together. There was an expiring tax, 1.5% tax, or 0.15, not even 1.5, 0.15, that initially, the arts community said, we're going to take that 0.15, we're going to go after that tax money, bring it all to the arts. Nothing in this community happens without compromise and coalition building. So ultimately, there was an agreement that they would split that 0.15 with other city services and needs. It led to then a ballot initiative that was adopted, I think 70% by the community in support of it, which has infused an additional $3.8 million into our arts investment. So significant new arts funding. I'm sure there's going to be conversations about additional funding needs, but that's a significant increase for our community. I'm going to mention two other small things in wearing the chamber hat. That we're very proud of that I think speak to our statement about the importance of arts and culture as an element of our economic vitality. One is that for those who aren't familiar with our community, we have what is called the beloved Boulder Star on the Flagstaff Mountain. We light it during the holiday season. We actually light it on Veterans Day in honor of our veterans, service of our veterans. Every year, for the past, I think now 25 years or something like that, we do a call out for artists from our community, and the way we fund that, the lighting of the star, is through an artist rendering of that star, creative, innovative design, turned into a holiday card. And that then is sold throughout the community, funding then the art, and it's that is implemented by the Boulder Chamber, again, showing that connection between the arts and the economy. And then second, just very proudly, there was a new program that was initiated, I think it was called Streetwise, that was implemented to paint murals on our buildings around town. And the very first round of that mural project, the Boulder Chamber stepped up and said, we want to take one of those murals, and pursued it, paid for it. And it has become a cultural icon for us. It's both a creative statement, it infuses in it a diversity message, also innovation, and it's boldly on the front of our building, and something we're very proud of, and I think a clear statement of artistic support from a traditionally business-focused organization. So, something we're proud of. So why don't I just then move into the next question, unless there's any other commentary. So it's not always easy to be an advocate for the arts and to ply your trade in promoting arts and culture. You face economic, social, cultural barriers. So wondering, in your communities, what are those barriers that you're facing? And I'm gonna give you a tip, and I'm gonna start it with Josh, so just the other end, just to mix things up. What are those barriers that you're facing, and how are you overcoming them? So Josh, you wanna speak to that?
Absolutely. I think we all recognize that the realities that in which we're living and working look very different today than it did 5 years ago. So I think one of the big challenges is how to respond to those barriers and those challenges in terms of workforce development in the creative economy, providing housing. We've mentioned some of these key concepts. One of the things that was relevant during the pandemic was how fragile the creative economy is, especially for a gig-driven workforce, right? So many folks are working multiple jobs or taking on different roles. And so I think there's some questions around how do we bolster and support that through the policy and the programs that we have. There's only so many dollars that can go around, right? Folks are often saying, well, we need more grant funding, or we need more matching funding, or even, tax credits are becoming more common. So how do we, bolster or build up those pipeline development, job development programs? And we have some things here in the state. The other piece is how to respond to the desire to provide data around some of these needs, right? Because we're looking at this through a lens of economic development, we're often asked, what's the economic impact? What's my return on investment, right? And we can talk about the churn of a dollar in the creative industries. We've all shared some statistics in terms of jobs and economic impact. We can talk about tax revenues and revenues through sales tax and those kinds of things. But what's hard to capture is how the arts play a role and the creative economy plays a role in prevention work, because we're creating space for folks to come together, to build community, to respond to this new wave of pandemic isolation that people have been experiencing. And then how do we measure that? I think that's one of the challenges. And then also, how can we speak to how the arts create a thriving economy or a thriving community? We can talk about the jobs, but what does it mean when there's a place that we can come, like where we are today at BMOCA, and it's this wonderful gathering space, we can work together, we can collaborate, we can feel welcome, we can feel a sense of belonging. Other places don't have that, and so what's the impact if you don't have that? Those are some challenges I think we're all thinking about.
The absence of arts and culture. What would that look like? God forbid.
Sounds like a great PSA, though.
Exactly. Sure, I think of it. Yep. David, do you want to take it from here?
I think at the local level in the county, we face a lot of the same challenges, and a lot of it comes down to funding decisions, of course. There's a finite pool of funding, and if you were to fund the arts, would that take away from a social safety net program or other types of things? So I think what's important is really starting to look, working with arts organizations, working with artists, to start shifting the narrative from arts as a charitable type of approach, but to really look at it as from selling, if you will, from a community service and benefit type approach. So arts organizations as service organizations, perhaps in the same way that a Boys and Girls Club might be eligible for funding, that arts organizations provide those same benefits, but can we frame the conversation to say that we provide after-school arts programming, and we are just as eligible for these funds as some of the other funds. So there may be accessing different funding pools that may not exist for a traditional type approach to arts and culture. And I think on a broader level, it's also really clearly defining the creative economy and understanding all the puzzle pieces that come together to make it. That there's, in some, when you say creative economy, people will oftentimes just immediately go to arts and culture and not understand that there's a really, not thinking about film, not thinking about music, architecture, marketing, publishing. These are big industries that really, have taken root in some of our major cities there. So getting folks to understand that the creative economy and its economic impact and the reasons to support it go beyond just supporting at the base level the arts and cultural organizations there.
I love it. George, I saw you shaking your head furiously, so
Oh,
take it
yeah.
away.
Well, okay. So, the pandemic. Hawaii was one of the 5 states in the U.S. that was disproportionately affected because of the high concentration of culture and arts which define our community. Yet we couldn't get any kind of federal support, even the, what was it, the Venues Fund from SBA. It turned out to be a really not so good thing. So one of the big challenges, I think, is anyone that is an arts agency, whether you're rural, regional, or state, or county, pick and choose the kind of federal grants you're going to go after and make sure that you are able to execute on it. One of the things that we're finding now, we're a recipient of the EDA Good Jobs Challenge funding, which went direct to our university. And one of the challenges that I see that's critical, and I think you might have something to say about this too, is the connectivity between what kids are learning in school and the jobs of today and tomorrow. It is definitely broken. And it's something that, as leaders in this creative space, we need to be front and center and helping to build the architecture to make that successful. We have wonderful media programs, for example, in the local schools, and then of course in our universities. Yet those people are not going to work on film and television that is a $400 million industry in the state consistently over the last 5 years, except for the pandemic and 23 with strikes. So we are really drilling down to the very nitty-gritty of career and technical education. How does it connect? And if it doesn't, there's a separate on-ramp for people, and that's what we're building. So we found a way, I should say this, but okay, audience, it is a way around the problems, because it takes a long time to turn curriculum around, right? So we have to have an alternative for those students who come out of high school and know what they want, and they may not go to a 4-year university, so.
Really important statements. I'm going to hit on some of that too, but Shannon, do you want to go next?
Sure, yeah. So I think it's really interesting that we have someone who's thinking about strategy for the state of Colorado, and then also somebody who's thinking about strategy locally, right here in Boulder. And I think that that's a really big opportunity for us. The state of Washington just did this strategic plan, and then the state of California looked at the legislation that authorized that strategic plan and funding for that, and copied it. And guess what? The state of California is now doing a creative economy strategic plan. In the meantime, too, when we were doing our planning process, we saw that there were so many resources that are out there that the creative communities are not attached to, that they could be attached to. And, Georgia mentioned, attaching creative economy pathways in K through 12 education. California just did a great job of that, refreshing the curriculum and career-connected learning and establishing apprenticeships on the state and national level. And guess what? The folks who did the organizing for that are now starting that in Washington State. And we have a kickoff next month to do that. I would also say that recognition that many people have touched on is really important, that recognition of the commercial and the cultural value of the creative economy. Washington State continues to lead the nation as far as per capita GDP of the impact of the creative economy. We have a high density of creativity in Washington State. That translates into a lot of jobs, a lot of economic activity, but it also makes it a really great place to live and to be. And just continuing to spread that awareness and that recognition of the importance, the commercial and also the cultural importance of the creative economy, so that we can access the resources that we need to support and build it.
I love it. And I see there's some comments coming in, so I wonder if at some point David might want to mention some of those.
That's a good transition, John. Thank you. So one of the topics that was brought up in the chat, and thanks for people who are offering comments and asking questions in the chat, and we encourage you to continue to do that, and we're monitoring all of that. So one of them has been touched on, and I believe some of you were looking at the screen too because of some of the comments you've made. But let's talk a little bit about two things. One is, how can we involve more gig workers and independent workers, individual artists and creative workers in the creative economy policy work that we're all doing? How do you think about those constituencies in your work? You've mentioned a little bit also about pipelines and workforce development and training. There are people who are saying, you know, again, like, what if I don't go through a professional course? What if I don't get this through college and university? How can I access some of this type of training and support? And a follow-on thing that is super specific and about Colorado, but might apply to other states, is someone talked about Opportunity Now Colorado and has that funded arts and culture. And I believe that that's a way for us to have a conversation about what are the kinds of support that the state provides that, like as you said, Shannon, a lot of folks in creative fields aren't aware of. So there may be opportunities for seed funding and investment in small businesses. There may be training opportunities that will help people with their creative practice. There may be apprenticeship opportunities that are not even obvious to them that people could use to bolster their creative practice. Can we have a conversation about that? How do you involve creative workers, gig workers, professional artists, individual artists, creative workers in your policy work? And how do we connect people to these opportunities, whether they're early in their career or throughout their career path, to enhance their work, enhance their ability to make a living, to sustain a living as a creative person? Who wants to kick us off with that?
You know, why don't I just I'm going to hit the how do you engage the gig workers in the policymaking. And I'll say that that's a challenge that we face as advocates for any interest group. So in particular, in my case, it's any business sector or industry sector. And that is that the folks who you're trying to support, the ones who need the resources, need the policy initiatives, they're busy. They're trying to ply their trade on a daily basis. Their heads are down. They're in their artist workshop. They're at their store selling their artistic creations. They don't have time to read the emails and the legislation that may impact their daily activities. So how do you engage them? Well, I would say that it's incumbent upon us as folks who want to support them to build the coalition amongst the organizations that help to support their work. So for example, BMOCA, that we're in this lovely facility today, Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art, other arts venues that bring together groups of artists, working with them collectively and using their tools of outreach and communication is absolutely pivotal. And only doing it when you absolutely need them. Otherwise, we need to do the groundwork, we need to do the outreach, but when there is a pivotal moment, when we need to have them show up at a state hearing, at a council meeting, whatever, giving them very clear direction that their voice is needed at this time. So I'm passionate about it because I know how difficult it is to engage the folks who are doing that work. And so I just know it's incumbent upon us to do our job better in discreetly defining when we need them, but then otherwise being their voice out amongst the policy leaders. Joy?
Yeah, it's a great example of bringing in, and I understand your point about, you know, it's difficult to get, you know, they're working on their careers and they're trying to make a living. But I want to give a shout out to our state arts agency, the State Foundation on Culture and the Arts for Hawaii. We had a very tricky legislative session, both of us, our director there, Karen Ewald, her and her team, they did such amazing outreach. They had such a network that we had hundreds of people show up against one particular bill, which was great. Ideally, it was going to move the agency to DBED, which is our agency, instead of in the Department of Accounting and General Services, which is where it is because they have buildings, you know, and they write checks. But what was strange is that the legislation morphed into something very negative. And so this community came and rallied. So it is possible, I think, through the networking of all of our communities, and we stay in touch. They're a touch point for us in our creative economy work as well. So we really respect them, and we know how hard it has been to crawl back from the pandemic when they couldn't get any kind of, you know, compensation. So. But yeah, just thought that was a great example of getting people together and getting out.
Action, getting people out to speak their minds. Other comments, Josh?
Yeah, absolutely. So specifically, there was a question about a program in Colorado, which I'm proud to talk about, and that's the Opportunity Now program. As I mentioned in my introduction, Colorado Creative Industries is in the Office of Economic Development, which is over a dozen or so divisions that works in different ways throughout the state, including Rural Business Office, Minority Business Office, other sort of lenses that support development within rural parts of the state. Opportunity Now is a grant program, of course supported by the governor and then passed through the legislature. The first tranche in, I believe, 2022 was over $80 million, which were really to create grant programs between educational institutions and key sector leaders in what the state has identified as key leading industries. To create that pipeline program, create paid internships, educational opportunities for folks so that they can get into the careers a little bit more quickly and more efficiently. As far as the role that the arts play, there's some challenges around that traditionally. Number one, again, speaking to what's the impact of that, those grants are very, very competitive. And so, making that connection between career tech, career advancement and technology, again, in the creative sector, how does that work in the workplace? So we're working on that so that there can be opportunities through Opportunity to Now for that creative workforce. And so the state has partnered with other agencies, individuals, nonprofits, organizations in terms of leadership programs, providing skills for folks that are working in creative sectors, whether that's our Change Leader program or other opportunities. We, during the pandemic, had a small grant program for individual artists to bolster them with what their needs may be. It could be for a performing artist needing to update their headshots or their website. It could be for a graphic designer needing to update the ways in which they do billing, and invoicing, those kinds of things. We're hopeful that through our strategic planning process at the state, we'll be able to bring back some of those resources. I think part of the conversation that I've heard is sometimes folks working in the creative sector don't see themselves as a member of the creative sector, or they don't see themselves as an entrepreneur. And so accessing those small business development grants through the Office of Economic Development that isn't necessarily in the Office of Creative Industry becomes something that folks necessarily don't automatically do. And so part of what we do is try and connect people, help navigate them to different resources. And we've had some success in that as well.
I love that. So connecting, for example, the Office of Economic Development with your work in the arts culture.
Yeah, and maybe putting folks in touch with the Rural Business Office or Minority Business Office, et cetera, that can help with some of those grant programs.
That's great, Josh. Shannon, I know you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to talk about artists and advocacy and creatives and advocacy, but I actually want to riff off of what you said too. I think that, oftentimes creative entrepreneurs, the business model that they have is much different than a lot of other business models. the arc to that product creation is a lot longer for somebody who's developing a video game or a live music album or a body of work for, a visual art show. And so oftentimes the folks who are going to provide that technical assistance or access to capital to start or to grow a project aren't familiar with those business models. So I think it's important to, in economic development, also skill the economic development people up, in rural settings and in urban settings about what it looks like. What is a typical business model? What are the monetization methods? And then also, for the artists and the creative workers, making sure that they're tracking that. So that they're able to access some of the resources that you were talking about. And then if I can skip back a little bit to artists and creatives and advocacy, I can't agree more that it's really important to pull people in when that moment is right. And it's really going to impact their livelihood. It's going to impact the way that they live in their community. And so, wait until that moment is really right and that it's going to be relevant to them. And then also, creatives have so much fun. They do really interesting things when they go out and do advocacy. I'm thinking about like Washington Film Works, when they do their film day on the Hill, they'll set up a big place where all of the legislators can come in and do film makeup and do, film shots and stuff like that. Or years ago, we had this dance tax that was an extra tax on places that provided entertainment. And so, folks who did dance, live music, that sort of thing, were really fighting to get rid of that extra tax. And they went in and did a dance-in on the Capitol steps and, just had a great time, costumes, loud music. And it's a way that's really refreshing for the legislatures to get their attention. And then they can come in with the impact on their livelihood and the impact on communities and the way that that's going to, the changes in policy or legislation are going to help them be better and more thriving in their lives.
I love it. Creativity and advocacy. We need that.
Yeah, that's
So
awesome.
boring otherwise. David.
Yeah, I think a lot of great things have been said here, but if I could just build on, I think, the gig workers, and you talked about business model, but perhaps defining what is the business model of a gig worker and saying that, yeah, it doesn't mean a 9-to-5, but this is the business model, this is the structure, this is how you piece a career together, and creating opportunities, creating more panels where people can learn from others' experience to say, I've never held down that standard 9-to-5 job, but this is how I created a successful career working in this industry. And there's a lot of folks out there that have done that and have gone that path. So I think our role in government in a lot of ways is to convene those folks and to get that word out, whether it's through workforce development programs or just standard, conferences, those type of initiatives as well. And I think, in terms of the advocacy component, there are certain things that we can look at in terms of as government entities of what we do know. We of course know that housing is a big issue, and can we support the gig workers through housing initiatives that might support the creative class and creative workers, and intentionally do that, understanding that there is a wide or a workforce out there that may not have the standard, again, 9-to-5 career pathways, but it still is in need of things like healthcare, housing, and all those, routine kind of, or those basic needs, and how as government can we develop programs and policies to help stand those up to help support them.
I think that's really important, and also working with agencies that you wouldn't normally work with, like the Department of Labor, both at the national level through your congressional constituency, and also with the directors. We started a dialogue with the Department of Labor and Industrial Relations in Hawaii during the pandemic and then after, because that is another institution, just like any kind of education institution, hard to turn that ship, but that is another place that we have to start, so these two things meet in the middle.
Fabulous. There was a comment in the chat that sort of builds on comments that both David and Georgia have made, so I'll try to bring those into our conversation and see what we think of them. One of them is something that there's a lot of attention about, and there's varying degrees of acceptance of this idea and agreement with this idea, but speaking to basic needs, what do some of you who would want to comment on this think of universal basic income and other similar models and their facility and addressing the needs of creative workers? We certainly saw a lot of pilot initiatives developed in the pandemic and thereafter that have tested that model. I'd say that most of those programs were pilots and have not been mainstreamed as ongoing commitments from government. So that's like one direction, and someone asked a very explicit question about that. And the other one is around what Georgia, what you were speaking about, and maybe going in a different direction with it. Who are some of your workforce development partners if you do workforce development work, especially your workforce development partners that maybe are not universities or large institutions in that way? What are community-based organizations or other kinds of groups that can be supported around workforce development goals? So those are the two directions. Anyone, let's, I guess, start with universal basic income. Any brief thoughts, reflections on what you've seen around that in your state or in your region?
It's been floated in Hawaii at the legislature. I don't know about the counties, but it is something to revisit. I think it's a great concept. Operationally, how it would work and the money for it, we're probably a few years away just because of the situation with Maui. So that has impacted all state budgets, but even more so would be a great opportunity to do that now. And I think starting at the county level is my instinct. I would start there and then move and connect the state.
You know, I'll just from a business perspective, I'll just offer that, you know, first of all, just when you think about society at large and the need to make sure that we lift everybody and they benefit from the economy, our chamber has been a strong supporter of a reduction in the economic strata right now that we see the income imbalance. So supporting things like minimum wage increase across the state, which we did. You know, I'd say that experiments in universal income, we are doing that in our city. We're taking a pilot project. We've been very interested. We haven't been asked to support it in any significant way through a tax or anything like that. So interested to see how that plays out and supports the folks who they're trying to lift. I think probably just the instinct, though, from our end relates to something that David was saying, is how do we help our arts and cultural community build themselves up as business entrepreneurs. They are businesses. They are business leaders in our community. Their product is arts and culture that we all benefit from. So we want to make sure that they thrive, but helping them to be sustained long-term with a business model that supports their artistic expression. I see that as probably the most important focus for our efforts. So that would be my response to a question like that.
And I think it helps because it also pulls away from the I need grants every 2 years. We need to be able to honor the fact that artists are business people, and if they aren't, then they connect with some people that are. But I think it helps. The reliance on grants sometimes is a double-edged sword, so I think that's where it also would be a benefit.
Yeah, in that entrepreneur support too, I think it's really important for it to be responsive to the culture of creativity. So, we did a lot of case studies looking at entrepreneur support that works in Washington State and nationally, and usually it's provided in a space where creatives feel comfortable. It's provided by other creatives who are already good at that aspect of running a business, whether it be marketing, pricing your work, creating pro forma budgets, those kinds of things, and then in language that's really resonant. An example is ACE Tacoma, and ACE stands for Accelerating Creative Enterprise, and it's a cohort model of business planning for women, identified people, and people of color. They work together over several weeks to create business plans together. And then also the program helps them to access, when it's appropriate, space for their work, and then also access to capital when that's appropriate as well. So just having it be a program that is very much culturally relevant, because oftentimes if you put an artist into a place where people are talking about monetization and this sort of thing, it's not going to sink in and it's not going to feel relevant. And also, again, like we talked about before, the business model is very different, and the gig economy workers are piecing together their income from multiple different revenue streams. It's very complex, you know, and so it's good for them to have access to other people who have experience in that same kind of model.
One of the questions you asked is local resources or statewide resources. And CCI works with Colorado Business Committee for the Arts to implement their arts leadership program. This brings together artists across the state, skills building, a lot of the things that we've been talking about. But one of the big takeaways is cohort building, so that folks can gain a peer group, they can troubleshoot challenges within their communities, think about ways that they can address some of these issues. We have a program at CCI, which is a change leader program, where arts leaders that are sort of earlier to mid-career in their arts programs or in their art career, some of them are administrators, some of them are educators, some folks are artists themselves, and many of these folks, we've all been there, they kind of do all of it, right? And so they come in and gain those skills. One of the things that I think a lot about, we talk about a creative economy, which means we are existing within the framework of a free economy. What is the market share of the value of arts in our community? Everything we've been talking about is how our programs basically subsidize the perceived value of arts. So one of the things I think about is how can the state of Colorado help elevate the perceived value of, everyone participates in the arts. We all value the arts. But are we investing in the arts? Are we buying from a local gallery? Are we supporting a local artist? Are we contributing in a way to an artist that actually helps pay the bills, rather than that artist then comes back and says, what grants are available to me? That's a complicated question. I don't think that's the role of government, but I think it could be a way in which we can help elevate that and support that message as, again, we sort of come out of this post-pandemic. People are interested in creative experiences, authentic experiences, connecting with one another, and the arts feel like that's the right sector for that to take place.
In Creative Lab, what we do is, for example, the music lab, Creative Lab Music Immersive, which is a 5-day immersive in how to place and license and sync license your music. And it's original creators that haven't had an opportunity to connect with people in this industry to do that. And one of the great things about it is after the 5 days, then we do have people in the room that are able to license their work. They are music libraries. They come from LA, and this has been the 5th year now. And we've placed over $600,000. And you talk about musicians being gig workers. They totally are. It's where the term came from, I think. And what's really important about it is that sending them to conferences or back to the mainland to record and collaborate with others, we agree that the spaces are important, but we also have to put them in front of the audience that they need to build their relationships with. And they have exceeded expectations on that. And they're coached for a whole year as well. So, and it's free because the state pays for it. So the only way to get in is you apply, and there's no cost. And we pay for them to go to the mainland too. So that is a good example, and that's an example that ties back to, why does good jobs, and programs like that just go to universities? And it's just the way that it's structured, but the way that I like to work is it's great to be in charge of the creative sector leads, but boy, you face that bureaucracy head on when you're trying to bring in the IATSE union to be able to craft a brilliant 20-page, here's a curriculum, pay us the $25,000 and we'll get it done. Well, there's bureaucracy in the way, so we pivoted and we're going to work with our community, we're going to get private funding, we'll use some of our special fund. So I think, again, to that question that was asked, it's important that you look at the assets in your community, do it first from the ground up, and build those relationships over time, then you can go to them. So many economic development agencies that are nonprofits sometimes are the better mechanism than a state or county government agency.
All right, we have about 8 minutes left, and I think we should open up for some questions from our in-person audience and anyone online as well. This is your last opportunity to ask our panelists some questions, and then we'll have a brief closing and transition from there. So any questions in the room? And I will, if my colleagues can help me, get a mic. We need to be able to mic whoever is in the room asking a question. And if you need to have mine, I will give you mine.
Hey there,
Wonderful.
Danielle Brazel, California Arts Council. We're about to hit it with the Creative Economy Plan for the state. Monetization of culture is one major thread, but what are the other currencies that we need to be thinking about in terms of the role that arts and culture plays in building a healthy society?
There's so many, you know, you think about community cohesion, like bringing people out together in person or online for a virtual experience, or they're experiencing the same thing. They can have conversations about it. They feel together as a community. You know, there's so many health benefits. There's so much work that's happening right now in prescribing arts experiences and lots of research around that. I'd love to see that grow more. You know, there's so much about building culture in your local region through creativity, through art, through music, you know, and then also reflecting the culture, like what's going on around us. The artists are the people who interpret that and show us, like they're our mirror. This is what's happening around us. This is where we can go in the future. I mean, there's so much to it as far as like, there's so much that's beyond the monetary part.
Building them into the plans, this triple bottom line aspect of the creative economy, social, civic, economic, or is it just the economic lens?
Oh, it has to be. It has to be grounded in, I mean, for our region, absolutely. It is a key asset. It's our differentiator that makes us very unique. And I think culture in all its forms, not just Native Hawaiian. I mean, we are a big melting pot of a community. And I think those things are intrinsic to how we view, and through our lens, how we build a stronger respect and a stronger bond between decision makers and those creatives that need a space to work. So also think about creative spaces in your regions, in your communities. I think there's many here. You touched a little bit on the co-working. We partnered with a tech agency that's part of our department, and no one said it could be done, but we did that. And so we have a creative space, is what it's called, and you can do this in any location. And I think Shannon's absolutely right. You know, we want to have spaces and provide that area so that they can thrive. And so culture at the baseline, economics is important, but remember, sometimes a lot of the economic data is 2 years behind us. So it's real-time economic data that we need, not necessarily the rearview mirror.
I think a couple of indicators that we could look at outside of that is really looking at notions of well-being and prosperity as well, so that it is not just the financial output or how many dollars go out to the community, but looking at other factors like social determinants of health, and both on individual well-being and communities. And I think that those numbers are starting to come out, both of the arts and health models that are coming out, and then there's some new research coming out of the UK that is looking at proximity and participation and engagement with cultural districts and how that is correlated with the other social determinants of health. So I think we can go beyond that financial model and really start showing the impact that it does, as a triple bottom line approach.
Yeah, and David, just to riff off of what you said too, I think it's really important to look at the conversations that are happening now internationally as well, as far as how people are measuring that, the benefits of culture. That are not just the economic benefits. There's a lot that we've already done in the U.S. Through the NEA and Americans for the Arts and such. But marrying those, and West Staff, of course. But marrying those two things of that kind of the community value, the cultural value, and also the commercial.
At the state agency, we've invested in programs, grant programs, but also programs that provide additional resources through our Arts and Society grant, specifically looking at the integration or the connection, the intersection between arts and social services, health, mental health and behavioral health issues, veterans, populations, et cetera. We have 2 new programs this year that we've partnered with other community entities, foundations, and that is Equity and Arts Learning for Youth. We know that during the pandemic, a lot of rural communities nationwide had to pull funding, and where did it come from? It often came from arts education, and so this helps bring back access to arts for Colorado's youth all across the state, and then also our folk and traditional arts, really investing in not only indigenous arts, but also what are those traditions here in Colorado, those folk traditions, whether that's based in Western culture or our mining culture, that we need to continue to tell those stories and invest in future generations to continue those traditions. It's a part of our heritage, it's a part of our culture, and it's important.
David, if I have time, I'll comment and then ask the last question. Do we have time for that?
You only have 2 minutes.
All right, I'm going to talk for 2 minutes then. No, I think what I'll do is hold off. I just have to say that question deeply important to me just when I think about the coming election, the concerns I have about the social fabric of society and how the role that arts and culture has in bringing us together and helping us understand each other in a deeper way. So critical now. But I think I'll just take the liberty of, do we have time for the last question? David, or do you want to close it? We don't. Oh.
We don't.
All right, moderator failure, excuse me.
It's all good. We integrated comments from the audience, so I'll try to do one thing. We had another question from the audience about federal lobbying efforts, basically in support of the creative economy, and I'll try to be super brief and offer one maybe final thought. So there are many lobbying efforts. One of them is called the Cultural Advocacy Group, and it brings together many organizations across the country who are doing their own independent federal lobbying. The Recording Academy, which Georgia and Shannon have collaborated and working with, I think Shannon worked there, has federal advocacy efforts. There are a number of organizations in the field that do federal advocacy interactive. Some newer efforts are things like the National Independent Venues Association, which is largely responsible, but not solely, for SVOG, the Chartered Venues Operators Grant that invested billions of dollars literally in our industry during the pandemic, leading to the solvency and continued operation of many organizations throughout our communities. That's a newer effort. There's also a group called Arts Workers United that has evolved and really established themselves through the pandemic and continues to operate and collaborate in a number of efforts. There are some nascent efforts to establish a national coalition focused on the needs and concerns of creative workers, and that's very much a project that is currently in development. So there are a number of traditional groups and coalitions that do federal advocacy, and there are newer groups that are focused on this work and putting creative workers at the center of our advocacy around arts, culture, and the creative economy. But it's a work in progress. It's all the things that we all know, but we are moving in that direction and we are organizing around that work. A last thought is just in terms of creative economy, when it first was brought to fruition as an idea, and creative industry is a related idea, was largely about advocating for increased investment in arts and culture from national and regional governments. And over that time, it has really evolved. And we have spent a lot of time and continue to investing in very valuable data that gives us an indication of the scope and scale of the activities that happen within the creative industries and broader creative economy. But the way that we think about economies is not just numbers. And a lot of what the creative economy is about, and really you could argue a lot of what our economy is about as a whole, is about relationships and exchanges. And money is not the only thing exchanged, and relationships do not always have to be transactional. And I think that that's at the heart of what the creative economy is about, because a lot of our exchanges are not necessarily monetary, and a lot of our exchanges are not necessarily transactional. but they are things that bring us together, build our communities, really transform our perspectives about the world and what's possible. And there's much more happening in the creative economy than simply monetary and financial transactions. So thank you so much for being
Well
part
said,
of this
David.
panel.
Great way to conclude.
And thank you to our audience.